Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me for part 9 of our live reading of The Golden Ass, or Metamorphoses, by Apuleius. This has been a long time coming. Sorry for the delay, and hopefully this will be our final reading. We'll finish the entire text today. And before we dive deep into the text, I want to give a summary because we did a really long episode. And I, as much as the rest of you, I'm sure, need to be refamiliarized with where we were and where we're going in this wild and crazy story with so many stories within stories. And if we remember, we began with book 8. And in book 8, the story began with our man Lucius hearing a horrible series, getting horrible news, series of events that the people who had rescued him, Charity and Telepolemus, had been killed, that they had died, and that they had been at the hands of this horrible person named Thrasyllus. And then we have one of these servants relay us this entire tale, this story. And it was such a crazy one. So what happens in that story is that Thrasyllus has always loved Charity and always dreamed of marrying Charity and had tried to woo her, but had failed. Telepolemus was the one that managed to get Charity's fancy. And he had always been jealous and desiring and wanting to possess her, and just a vile monster in the background. And so when he hears about the story of her kidnapping and then sees their wedding and he's there and he's present, his jealousy and his rage kind of take over, and he decides that he's going to ingratiate himself into the family, becomes really good friends with everyone, but always scheming for a way that he could possess Charity. And eventually he finds his moment. Him and Telepolemus and a bunch of their slaves, they go out into the wilds to go hunting. And while out in the wilds hunting, they come across a wild boar. And in the moment when they could slay the boar, rather than slay the boar, our man Thrasyllus knocks Telepolemus off his horse and stabs him in the thigh, making it look like it was a gorge from a boar wound. And then he tells everyone and pays off the slaves, says that he was murdered. He says that he was killed by the boar, right? And covers up the murder, and everyone believes it. And Charity freaks out, goes into extreme mourning, crying her eyes out, donning the black, weeping to the point of starving herself. And her family has to intervene, and Thrasyllus keeps intervening. And this is where the second part of his plan comes in. He starts constantly doing everything he can to get close to her, to touch her, to be in communication with her, and just constantly trying to get her to overcome the grief and be with him. Eventually, he starts pressuring her and telling her exactly what he wants. And this kind of shocks her, and she starts to panic. And then it's confirmed when in a dream, the spirit of Telepolemus shows up and tells her exactly what had happened, and that he hopes that she could go on to love anyone else, just not that monster, the one who killed him just to possess her. So this shocks Charity, and Charity, already grief-stricken and feeling this extreme pressure, decides to concoct her own plan of revenge. She talks to Thrasyllus, and eventually she agrees to his advances and says, "Fine, you can come and we will make love, but you can't tell anyone in my family. You have to believe I am still in mourning, and we have to do it secretly in the middle of the night." So Thrasyllus agrees. In the middle of the night, he sneaks into the castle, and he's confronted by the maid of Charity. And the maid of Charity tells him that Charity has to take care of her sick father, but will be there shortly. In the meantime, drink this wine. Well, turns out the wine is poisoned. He drinks the wine and he gets knocked out. And as soon as he's completely passed out and asleep, the maid goes and retrieves Charity. And Charity decides to give him her worst fate that she can imagine. And she takes out a needle and decides to blind Thrasyllus. and takes the needle and sticks it into his pupils. And he awakes in excruciating pain, screaming and freaking out. And she tells him all she knew about what he did. And then she takes up her husband's sword and goes to his tomb where he's been freshly entombed. And she kills herself on top of the tomb. And in a last ditch of desperation, turns out Thrasyllus had crawled his way there. And in a last chance to redeem himself, he decides to commit suicide by locking himself in the tomb with the two lovers, Charity and Tlepolemus. And he would starve to death, blind in that dark tomb. What a terrifying story and what a wild story. But this causes a massive ruckus, and the family, which was employed by Tlepolemus, that owned our man Lucius, our donkey, they panic. They're terrified that their situation is going to change. They don't know who's going to inherit the land, and they decide that their best chance is to pack up their things and to take off to the next town. So that's what they do. They pack up, they take off to the next town. And this is where we get, where at me. I just need to remember there's just so many stories within stories here. It's like, what happens? Yeah, the enslaved people wander. They're attacked by these weird people. They come into this really dark, horrible place where they say there's bandits everywhere, and it gets so crazy and so violent. And just a lot of insanity starts happening. And what ends up happening after that is that eventually they make it to a town, and the people in their desperation, they decide to sell Lucius at auction. And he goes at auction, and the people who wind up buying him is this guy Philebus and his group of, is there no sound? Can everyone hear me? All right. Philebus and his group of wandering mendicant monks who are in worship of the Syrian goddess Atagarsis, Cybele, right? And they want to use our man Lucius in multiple different ways. It's kind of wild when we get to get into this whole thing with these crazy, these are the trans priestesses, I should say, of the Syrian goddess, right? They identify the goddess as Atagarsis Cybele, and they are engaged in kind of illicit behavior. They kind of go around and they beg and they perform music, but they also engage in sex work, and they pimp themselves out to young men in order to make money. And they have Lucius carry around this statue with them, and they go on several adventures. The first town they go to, they manage to get a bunch of people to donate the money, and then they find some young men who are young man who's interested in paying them to engage in an orgy. So they go into this back alley room to engage in this orgy rite. And Lucius, being so appalled, so shocked at this, starts braying. And just so happens that people who are looking for their donkey hear Lucius braying at the sight of this orgy, and they knock the door down and they catch these priestesses, right, in this act with this young man, and they freak out. And so they drum up a crowd and they chase them out of town, and then they run off to the next town. And the next town, what ends up happening is they meet up with a really rich who decides that he's going to support the priestesses and give them shelter. And he takes in the priestesses of Cybele, and is helping them out. But things go kind of bad for Lucius. What ends up happening is that earlier that day, the owner had managed to get his hands on a piece of venison, and he gave it to his cook, and his cook hung it from the wall. But one of the sneaky hounds managed to steal the venison and run off with it. So now the chef, in a panic, freaking out, doesn't know what to do. He's almost about to commit suicide when he sees Lucius. And he goes, you know what? This is going to solve my problem. I'm going to kill that donkey and pretend he's venison, and everyone will believe it. And I won't have to kill myself. No, this craziness won't happen. So, but when he goes to try and do this, Lucius panics and freaks the F out. And he goes on a rampage, and he mashes his way into the dining room right in front of the master. And he starts kicking up a storm in front of everything. And everyone starts freaking out. And they eventually manage to subdue him, and they lock him into a room. Just turns out there happened to be a rabies outbreak, and that one of these animals had bit a bunch of the other animals on the state, and they had been dealing with rabies. So they all assume that Lucius has rabies. And this is such a blessing for our man Lucius, because he gets to take a whole night's sleep, and he relaxes, he goes to bed. And when he wakes up in the morning, the guards are wondering, oh, does he still have rabies? Is he possessed? Is he possessed? And they're like, well, let's give him the water test. So they open up the door, and they bring him a bowl of water, and they say, if he drinks the water, then we know that he's over the rabies. So he drinks the water, and they say, okay, he's fine. And they give him back to the priestesses of Cybele. And these priestesses decide they're going to go on their way. And just before they do, they make a stop over at the local temple, and they do some praying at the local temple to the mother goddess. And then they leave. They don't get out of the town for very long, though, before guards are coming up, freaking out at them, making all kinds of accusations that they're doing sex work, that they stole the goddess's golden cup, and that, you know, all this horrible stuff. And it's kind of wild. The priestesses, they just pull out the cup and say, well, you know, the mother goddess gifted it to us. And, you know, we are owed this because the Syrian goddess and the mother goddess are the same. And it's hilarious. Philibus has got quite the gumption. And this doesn't fool the guards, doesn't stop them at all. They decide to arrest the whole lot, and they bring him back to town. And our poor man, Donkey Lucius, gets put up to auction yet again. And this time, he gets sent to like a cruel, cruel slave mill, where these people have like literal slaves who are wearing rags and are branded on the forehead, and half their heads are shaved, and they're enchained, and all the animals are tortured and whipped. And the whole place is run by this horrible, horrible woman who like cheats on her husband and lies to him and engages in all this horrible blackmailing of everyone and manipulation. And she's kind of like into torture. She basically tortures poor Lucius for the fun of it, because he's the newest animal, and she's just enjoying this. But Lucius, being a donkey, can hear everything. Even though they've blinded him, they put a hood on him, and they're forcing him to work in this mill, and they're whipping him and torturing him. He hears all the stuff that everyone's talking about, and he hears all these crazy rumors and all these crazy debaucherous acts that are happening in the town. And we get a bunch of we get three different stories that wind up happening. You know, we get the first story, which is about the pauper's wife. And what happens with the pauper's wife is she goes off most nights to sleep around. And one night her husband goes off to work, and she brings in a lover. And the lover comes in, and they start, you know, she makes sure to lock the door behind her, you know, and they're doing their thing. But then her husband comes home and starts knocking on the door. So she not even panics. She's been here before. She tells him to go hide. They have this weird jar in the middle of their house, and says, go inside the jar, hide yourself in the jar. And so the husband comes in, and he goes, wife, guess what? I have wonderful news. On my way to work today, I met someone, and I sold the jar. I sold the jar for 6 denarii. And she's like, You think she'd panic, but no. This lady is so flippin' smooth and wild. She's like, well, really, I have someone who's interested in buying it already, and they're currently inside checking it out. And they said they were going to pay 7 denarii. And he goes, what? And her lover hears all this through the jar. They open the jar, and he jumps out and doesn't even bat an eye. And he's just like, doesn't even pretend, doesn't even know him. And he just says, treats him like a worker. He's like, you there, help me clean this jar so I can see if it's actually worth the $7 that I, 7 denarii that I'm thinking of paying of it. And he's just like, no, let me. And he goes inside and he starts cleaning out the jar of all the dirt and filth so that they can purchase it. And in the meantime, while this is happening, the wife and this dude start having sex right outside of the jar, with the wife's head dangling over, and she's scolding him, telling him to do a better job of cleaning, all the while getting railed. It's like one of the most insane things. And then when he's done cleaning it, they make him put the jar on his back and drag it all the way to her lover's house. And she pockets the $7. So just like, whoa, one of the most crazy kind of stories. And then we get the story of the baker's wife. And the baker's wife is a little bit different, where young lover comes over to the baker's wife. Similar story, though, where they go to hide him, but this time they hide him in this chamber where there's like smoking sulfur. Okay, they're smoking sulfur. So she hides the lover in this chamber where there's all this smoking sulfur. And they come in and they think that something's off because the wife keeps coughing. And at first they're like, okay, this is the wife. But then they hear the cough and the wife doesn't make a cough. And then they go, wait, there's someone here. And they open up this room where they got this smoking sulfur thing in this bakery. And they find the guy there, and he's like dying of sulfur poisoning. And at first the guy's like, I'm going to kill him. And then his buddy's like, no. He's already dying of sulfur poisoning. Let's just wait this out. So they wait till he's almost near dead. And then they throw him out into the streets and they let him die. You're just like, holy crap. And then we hear this other story about Myrmex Barabbas. And a lot of you were laughing at me for this, trying to pronounce the name Philesisteris. But I can pronounce it, I assure you. Philesisteris, Arete, Barabbas, Myrmex. All these interesting characters that are happening. But we get this wild story where what you have this wife who's unfaithful and is engaging in lovemaking with this man named Barabbas. And now she has the servant Myrmex and gets Myrmex basically to help cover this all up and to ensure that she gets away with it. So one day while she's engaged in lovemaking with Barabbas, she gets Myrmex to distract the husband. Or sorry, with not Barabbas, with Philesisteris. Well, Arete and Philesisteris are engaging in lovemaking. Myrmex distracts Barabbas, okay, and keeps them at bay. But what ends up happening is that the husband finds the shoes of the lover of his wife, right? And he blames the slave and blames him and says that you must have been the one, or you're covering it up, you distracted me. And so he's going to go kill him. And now he's determined. He's going to go throughout all the town. He's determined he needs to find the person who has these shoes. Who had these shoes? Well, Philesisteris, being quick on his feet, he sees this happening, that Myrmex is being brought to justice. They're probably going to throw him in the gale and execute him. And they have these shoes with him. And then he, quick on his feet, runs up and just starts beating the shit out of Myrmex. And it's like, how dare you? You stole my shoes. You stole my shoes. You stole my shoes. And in the end, what ends up happening is Myrmex doesn't go to the gallows. Nothing bad happens. They blame him for everything, for the infidelity, for the shoes, for all of it. And everything turns out hunky dory. Philisterius gets his shoes back. And just kind of the most wild kind of stuff, you know. All right, what else do we have? Sorry, guys. Just trying to remember everything. There's just so many stories and whatnot. I'm just going to continue. If you really want to get all of the little sub stories from book 9, you can go back and listen to me read book 9, because there's just a bunch of craziness that happens. But eventually, you know, the wife of this mill gets caught in all of her debaucherousness. You know, all kinds of horrible bad stuff happens, and our man Lucius gets auctioned for a third time. And this time Lucius gets auctioned off to a poor farmer, and the farmer is like super struggling, you know, barely making enough crops to get by, and just always kind of like struggling, you know, until one day what happens is the Roman soldier walks by and he sees the donkey not having anything on his back, and so he shouts at the guy in Latin, and the guy doesn't respond. You know, he didn't really hear, you know, and he continues on his way. And what ends up happening is that the soldier freaks out, you know, when he pretends, like he says, like, why didn't you hear me? Why didn't you hear me? How do you not understand me? And the guy responds back, the farmer, he's like, I just don't speak Latin. I only speak Greek. So then the soldier starts responding to him in Greek and says, we need to commandeer your donkey. We're going to take your donkey. And he's like, no, you can't have my donkey. And so the soldier just freaks out and starts beating the living tar out of this poor gardener. Well, the gardener isn't so weak as you would think. In a wild twist of fate, the gardener manages to grab the Roman soldier by the feet and knock him flat on his back and just starts beating the crap out of him. And the soldier's like, if only I had my sword, I'd kill you. So the gardener takes the sword and throws it off the edge of the cliff, way out of nowhere. And he comes back and just starts beating on him again, until he finally, when he beats on him until the soldier starts playing dead. And at that point, our farmer gets on the donkey and he takes off into town. And it turns out he has a friend in town who agrees to hide him. So they hide him in this house with the donkey. And the Roman soldier, though, he's now been completely humiliated. He just got his ass beat by a poor farmer and got his sword stolen, right? He can't find his sword. And he returns back, and this is like the greatest insult imaginable. So the Roman soldiers all agree they need to get the sword back and they need to shame this guy now. So they all go back into town, immediately looking for Lucius and the farmer. And they pay off a bunch of people, and one of them tells them that in Buddy's house there, the donkey and the man are hidden. You know, so they get the townsfolk, the town's police in, and they demand that they want to see into this person's house. And he's like, no, I don't have anything. You can't come in my house. I'm not hiding anything. No one is here. I haven't seen my friend. What are you talking about? But they insist. They keep searching. And just when they're going to give up, just as they're leaving, our man Lucius sticks his head out the window. And the Roman soldiers just happen to see the tips of his ears because he's trying to hear what's going on. And they run back in the house. They catch him in this secret compartment upstairs. And then they find the man locked inside a chest. So they take the man and they send him off to be executed at the Gaol. And they take our poor man Lucius into custody. And they load him up with all of the Roman gear. And they start marching him. And that's where we get onto book 10, you know. And the soldiers loaded up Lucius with his armor, and they begin to travel. They stop, and the soldier leaves Lucius with an enslaved person. And then A couple days later, you hear a story basically about an unfaithful stepmother. And that's sort of where we had left off. And I think I'm just going to go back. And we had left off at 10:30, I believe, but we're going to go a little bit back, or 10:13. We're going to go a little bit back and start from the beginning of this story here. So let me pull up our text here. All right. Yeah, so we had ended just before 10:13. So what I'm going to do is we'll go and read the whole tale of the wicked stepmother. Where does that start? Well, we'll just start with book 10. We'll just start with book 10. Whatever. Here we go. Sorry, guys. I hope you don't mind me. Let me just fix this here. Make sure everything's looking good. All right. Book 10. What became of my gardener the following day, I have no idea. But as for me, the soldier who had won such a lovely beating for his wondrously vile temper took me from the stable without anyone opposing him and led me away. He piled me high with the luggage from what were his barracks, I assume, and set me off up the road, festooned all over and kitted out in military fashion. I carried a brightly gleaming helmet, a shield which shone brighter still, and a spear with a great long shaft, all heaped on the top of this pile of baggage, like a miniature army on its travels, and not on account of regimental orders, but to frighten poor travelers. At the end of a flat and easy journey, we arrived at a small town where we lodged not at the inn, but at the home of a counselor. Here the centurion gave me into the keeping of a slave, and set off straight away to report to his colonel, who had command over 1,000 men. A few days later, a wicked and dreadful crime was committed in the town, which I'll set down here so you can learn of it too. The owner of my lodging had a young, well-educated son, who was in consequence all obedience and good behavior. The kind of son you would wish for your own. The boy's mother had died years before. The father remarried and had a 12-year-old boy by his second wife. The stepmother held sway, noted more for her beauty than character, and either through an innate disregard for her chastity or driven by fate to commit a wholly wicked crime, she turned her eyes longingly on her stepson. You. So, dear reader, now you know this no trivial tale, but a tragedy, and you've risen from comic slippers to platform shoes. As long as Cupid remained an infant, nourished on simple fare, the stepmother hid her guilty blushes and silently staved off the love god's weak assaults. But her heart, slowly filling with raging flames, hot frenzied love, at last blazed in her wildly, and she yielded to that savage god. Feigning illness, she tried to pretend her wounded heart was really bodily illness. Now, as we know, the usual effects of one's appearance are exactly the same in the lovesick and those sick for other reasons, namely abnormal pallor, languid eyes, weak knees, restless sleep, and sighs, which are more intense the more protracted the torment. You'd have thought in her case, too, a high temperature caused her fever, except that she was also full of tears. Alas, the ignorance of medical minds, unable to diagnose from those throbbing veins that variable complexion, the labored breathing, the tossing from side to side. Yet, dear gods, any intelligent person, even one who's not a specialist, knows the symptoms of desire on seeing someone burning without a physical cause. She became more and more agitated by her unbearable ardor, until at last, breaking her long silence, she summoned to her side this son, whom she would gladly have called by another name to spare her sense of shame. The youth responded at once to his stepmother's request, entering the patient's bedroom with as anxious a brow as some melancholy old man, but only out of courtesy to his father's wife and brother's mother. She, long tormented and harassed by her secret, was now, however, aground on a shoal of doubt. Every time she grasped at a phrase appropriate for the moment at hand, she rejected it again. And even as her feelings of shame abated, she still hesitated as to how to begin her speech. But the youth it was who took the lead, suspecting nothing, with a respectful look, asking the cause of her present illness. As they were alone, she seized the moment to speak with dangerous boldness, and weeping floods of tears, hiding her face with the hem of her robe, she addressed him briefly in a quivering voice. The whole root and origin of my present illness, as well as my only hope of cure and recovery, is you, yourself. Those eyes of yours penetrated my eyes and plunged to the depths of my heart, and set the fiercest flames burning in my marrow. Take pity on one who dies because of you, and don't be concerned by your respect for your father, for his wife is at death's door, and you can save her for him. I am right to love you since I see his likeness in your face, and have no fear. We are alone, and there is time enough for what is needed. What none know of has scarcely happened. The young man was disturbed by this unexpected trouble, but though he recoiled from the act, he thought it best not to cause a crisis by the harshness of an inopportune refusal, but rather to diffuse it by a guarded promise and seek delay. He urged her, with a wealth of assurances, to be of good cheer and devote her time to rest and recuperation, until his father's absence might allow them free time for dalliance. Then he hurried from her sight, deciding that such a challenge to the family honor needed wise counsel. He took the matter to his old and learned tutor. After long deliberation, they both decided that the safest course to escape this cruel storm of fortune was urgent flight. But his stepmother, impatient over the slightest delay, with ready cunning, invented some pretext or other that persuaded her husband to go and view the situation of his widely scattered rural estates. Once he had left, she, wild with ripened expectation, impetuously demanded that the youth honor his pledge. But he gave one excuse after another to avoid the sight of her whom he detested. When from the messages she received, she realized he had finally reneged on his promise, the volatile woman showed her inconstancy, and illicit love turned to even fiercer hatred. She confided in a slave, acquired as part of her dowry, a villain ready for any crime, apprised him of her treacherous scheme, and agreed it was best to end the poor lad's life. So off the scoundrel went to obtain some swift poison, which he carefully dissolved in wine in preparation for the murder of the innocent boy. But when those two were conferring as to when to offer him the wine, fate chanced to intervene. The younger boy, the stepmother's own son, came home from morning school for his lunch, and feeling thirsty, found the wine already imbued with poison. Ignorant of the danger lurking there, he drank it in one great gulp, and swallowing the venom destined for his brother, fell lifeless to the ground. His servant, terrified at his sudden collapse, raised a cry of horror that brought the mother running along with the whole household. When they realized the tragic turn of events, each called out accusations of monstrous crime. The vile woman, a perfect type of the wicked stepmother, was untroubled, however, by her own son's cruel death. Her guilt for the murder, the family's grief, her husband's mourning, or the pain of the funeral. Instead, she used the catastrophe to further her revenge. She sent a messenger at once to give her husband the tragic news that sent him hastening back from his trip. Then, playing a role of extreme audacity, she claimed her stepson as the cause of her son's death by poison. Indeed, this was not quite utter nonsense, since the younger boy had indeed incurred the death intended for the elder. But she went on to accuse the stepson of murdering his young brother, simply because she'd refused to meet his shameful demands when he sought to seduce her. And not content with these monstrous lies, she added that he'd threatened her too with a sword on being accused of the crime. So now, the poor husband, blown about by the winds of misfortune, was threatened with the death of his other son. Having witnessed his younger son's funeral, he also knew without a shadow of doubt that the elder would be sentenced to death for incest and fratricide. And then the feigned grief of a wife he loved too well had even quenched his love for his son. The funeral was scarcely over, the procession and burial done, when the wretched man, his cheeks still wet with tears, his ash-strewn hair torn, hastened from the pyre to the forum. There he clutched the counselor's knees, weeping and entreating, ignorant of his vile wife's treacheries, calling in the full flow of his emotions for the execution of the living son. He decried him as an incestuous coveter of his father's marriage bed, a murderer stained with a brother's blood, an assassin bent on killing his stepmother. The father's grief and anger roused the council and the people to such overwhelming pity and wrath that the crowd wished to dispense with the formality of a trial, since the prosecution case was abundantly clear and his defense would merely be a studied evasion. They shouted as one that this sin against themselves should be punished by themselves, and the murderer crushed beneath a hail of stones. But the magistrate feared damage to their status if mob rule arose from a limited cause. With public order and civic government bypassed, some of them interceded with the councilors, others remonstrated with the crowd, arguing that a verdict should be given after due process, that the allegations on both sides should be examined, and sentence delivered in a civilized way. In a time of peace and calm, they should not condemn a man unheard, as savages might, or barbarous tyrants. That would be a monstrous precedent for future generations. Their wise advice was taken, and the town clerk ordered to summon the judicial court to the council chamber. All took their seats in order of rank, and at a signal from the clerk, the prosecutor first made his case. Eventually, the defendant was summoned, and in accordance with Attic law and the court of the Areopagus, the clerk reminded the defense to avoid a long preamble or attempts to arouse pity. This was how things went, as I learned from overheard conversation. Since I was not in court but tied to my manger, I can't report the actual words the prosecution used or how the defense sought to rebut the charges, the precise debate and discussion in effect. Excuse me. But though I can't report what I didn't hear, I'll set down carefully what I reliably determined. As soon as the lawyers had presented their case, it was decided that definitive test should be made of the truth and consistency of the charges, so as not to ground such a vital decision on mere speculation. In particular, the slave who'd obtained the poison and was thought to be the only witness to all that had happened was made to take the stand. That candidate for the gallows was not the least bit deterred by the magnitude of the charge, the sight of the packed council chamber, or his guilty conscience, but gave his own false evidence as if it were truth, asserting that the youth, angered by his stepmother's rejection, had summoned him to avenge the insult and kill his mistress's own son, threatening him with death if he refused, then given him the poison mixed with his own hands to administer to the brother, and lastly, suspecting him, the slave, of ignoring his orders and keeping the poisoned chalice as evidence of crime, had given the brother the cup himself. This account, an all too plausible travesty of the truth, was delivered without a trace of nervousness, and so the trial came to an end. All the counselors seemed convinced of the young man's guilt, and that he should be sentenced, according to law, to be sown in a sack and drowned. It only remained to return a unanimous guilty verdict, and cast their written votes in the bronze urn, as had been done since time immemorial. Once the ballots were lodged, the defendant's fate was sealed. The decision could not be altered, and the executioner was granted power over his life. At this moment, however, one of the elders, an outstandingly well-respected physician of impeccable honesty, covered the mouth of the urn with his hands to stop anyone thoughtlessly casting his vote, and made the following speech to the court. Having lived happily to a ripe old age and enjoyed a good reputation among you, there is no way I can allow a defendant to fall victim to false accusations. It would be tantamount to murder, nor can I permit you, bound as you are by oath to judge rightly, to accept this perjury, the lies of a worthless slave. I cannot myself evade my moral obligation and bring in a faulty verdict against my own conscience. Listen to me and learn the facts. This scoundrel of a slave came to me a while ago and offered me 100 gold pieces for a quick-acting poison. He claimed it was needed for a man who was ill, one tortured by the slow progression of an incurable disease, who wished to free himself from his torment. Hearing the clumsy pretext given by this garrulous rascal, and thinking he might be planning some crime, I gave him the poison, but took precautions in case that were true. I did not take the money proffered, but told him to seal the sack of money with his ring, in case some of the gold was counterfeit, and I'd have it verified tomorrow in a banker's presence. So I convinced him to set his seal on the business, and as soon as this case was called, I ordered a servant to run and bring the sack from my premises. He has arrived, and here's the sack, which I set before you as evidence. Let me look and admit to his own seal. Let him look and admit to his own seal. How can the brother be accused of buying the poison when this slave it was who did so? The tale of the wicked stepmother, resurrection. At this, the rascal of a slave began to tremble violently. His normal color was succeeded by a deathly pallor, and a cold sweat bathed his entire body. He shifted his weight from one foot to another, scratched his head, and babbled such inarticulate nonsense through his half-closed mouth that no one surely could have thought him free of guilt. Yet recovering his composure, he resolutely denied everything and repeatedly accused the doctor of lying. The latter, finding his own honesty impugned and the integrity of the legal process undermined, refuted the man's words with redoubled energy. And finally, at the magistrate's command, the officers of the court removed the iron seal ring from the slave's finger and matched it to the wax impression on the sack. The exact fit confirmed their suspicions. Nor, in the Greek matter, did they then refrain from the torments of the wheel and the rack, yet the slave suffered them with marvelous obduracy, not yielding even to the soles of his feet being burned or beaten. The doctor then exclaimed, I cannot allow the court to commit injustice and execute an innocent young man, or allow this rogue to make a mockery of our due process and escape the consequences of his evil deed. Now I must reveal all the facts. The rascal asked me for a deadly poison, yet I believe it against my profession to offer anyone the means to further death or destruction, since I was always taught that medicine is devised to heal and not to harm. Yet I feared if I refused, I would not prevent a crime by my peremptory denial, that he'd procure a fatal poison elsewhere or accomplish his deadly design in the end by the use of a sword or other weapon. So I gave him a drug, mandragora, known for its soporific effect, which produces a death-like coma. No wonder the prisoner resisted your torture so readily, since with the death penalty decreed in case of murder, he is desperate to keep silent. However, the boy, if he only took the medicine I mixed with my own hands, is still alive and in sleep. Once rested, he will rouse from his deep coma and return to a waking state. But if he has been killed, if death has intervened, you must seek the reason for that death elsewhere. The old man's testimony convinced them, and they hurried to the sepulchre where the boy's body lay entombed. Counselors, nobles, commoners alike all streamed to the place in their excitement. The father raised the lid of the sarcophagus with his own hands, and behold, he found his son rousing himself from a death-like sleep, having been held back from the fatal threshold. Clasping him tightly, lost for words to express his joy at the event, he then led him outside to show the crowd. The boy was then brought before the court, swathed and cloaked as he was in his burial shroud. Now the naked truth was revealed, and the evil slaves and the more evil stepmother's crimes were clearly known. The stepmother was sentenced to perpetual exile. The slave was crucified. By mutual agreement, the good doctor was allowed to keep the gold paid for his opportune prescription. As for the father, his tale of unwelcome notoriety and ill fortune had an ending worthy of divine providence. He who barely a moment before, a brief instant, had been at risk of being rendered childless, was once more the father of two young sons. As for me, tossed about on the waves of fate, the soldier who had never purchased me and acquired me at zero cost, sold me for 11 denarii, after the tribune sent him with dispatches to the emperor in Rome. The buyers were two brothers from the neighborhood, household servants to a wealthy man. One was his pastry cook, who baked bread and concocted honeyed desserts. The other his chef, who cooked tasty dishes of tender meat, seasoned with flavorsome sauces. The brothers lived together, sharing their earnings, and bought me to carry the various utensils they needed whenever their master traveled around from place to place. I was accepted as the third comrade of those two, and never did fate treat me so kindly. In the evening, after some luxurious banquet with all the trimmings, they would return to their lodgings with the remains, the chef bringing ample portions of fish, roasted pork, chicken, and other meats, his brother carrying bread and croissants, cakes, tarts, biscuits, and many a honeyed dainty. As soon as they locked the house and went off to the baths to refresh themselves, I would dine to my satisfaction on that celestial fare. I was not after all so true an ass, so complete a fool as to neglect those sweet leftovers in favor of coarse hay. For a while, my cunning thefts went well, since I was stealing cautiously and modestly, only a little from a vast array of food, and they were little mindful of an ass. But as I grew more confident in my deceit, and began to devour the richest spoils and lick at the tastiest delights, the brothers' minds were filled with deep suspicion. Though I was not considered, they set out eagerly to track down the culprit behind their daily losses. They even began in the end to suspect each other of being the wicked thief, and started to take careful precautions, keeping a sharper eye and taking an inventory of the dishes. Finally, overcoming his reserve, one accused the other of the crime. What you are doing, brother, is unjust and unreasonable, stealing the best of the day's leftovers and selling them quietly to increase your profits, yet demanding an equal share of what remains. If you're unhappy with our partnership, let's dissolve our bond and cease holding assets in common. We can still be brothers in all other respects, but I see this matter doing us enormous harm and breeding violent quarrels. By Hercules, the other replied, I congratulate you on your show of coolness. You've been secretly taking the remnants every day. Now you pretend to suffer from my own cause for complaint, one I've tolerated silently while bemoaning it for many a long while, so as not to accuse my own brother of sword theft. Still, it's a good thing we've both spoken and are seeking redress for our loss. Otherwise, we might have stayed mute and fought each other. Apuleius and Apuleius did, in regarding the throne of Thebes. Oh, I'm not sure. Who is this? Apuleius and Apuleius. Let's look this up. Oops. 1 second here. All right, Google. Right, two brothers from the Antigone. Apuleius was concurrent ruler following the death of his father Oedipus, Polynices, who had previously been exiled, was the elder brother and believed it was his right to be king. So they fought each other in civil war, right? That's what this is about, over the throne of Thebes in the Antigone. Interesting. They ended the argument by swearing that neither was guilty of theft or deceit, and pledged to search out, with all the skill they had, whoever was responsible for their mutual loss. The ass, they agreed, the only other creature present, would find those sorts of dishes unappetizing. Nevertheless, the choicest morsels had been disappearing, and there were no signs of monstrous flies buzzing around the room like those harpies that long ago robbed Phineas of his food. That's another story that's from the Odyssey. Phineas can see into the future and stuff, and he was tormented by harpies. He would live forever, but he could never eat his food. The harpies would just take whatever was on his plate. Just a terrible story. Oh, sorry, that's the Argonautica, I believe, actually. What's it from? Let's look this up. All right. What does it say here? In Greek mythology, Phineas was a king of Thrace. All right. Go on his family. Okay. Apollo is said to have given him the gift of prophecy, but the latter's own blinding was variously attributed to the outrage against his sons, his giving Phrixus directions on his journey, or because he preferred long life to sight. Whereas reported in the Argonautica is where we get his most famous version, for revealing the future to mankind. For this reason, he was also tormented by the harpies, who stole or defiled whatever food he had at hand, or according to the catalogue of women, drove Phineas himself to the corners of the world. According to Scalia on the Odyssey, when asked by Zeus if he preferred to die or lose sight as punishment for having his sons killed by their stepmother, Phineas chose the latter, saying he'd rather never see the sun, and consequently it was the scorned Helios who sent the harpies against him. Oh, wow. Cool. All right. I stuffed each day, meanwhile, with ample nutriment, crammed to overflowing with human victuals, had grown obese, packed with solid fat, my sleek hide shiny with grease, my coat polished to a noble sheen. But this bodily excellence of mine led shamefully to my disgrace. Excuse me. The brothers began to notice my exceptional expansiveness of girth. That's a beautiful sentence. And noticed my hay untouched, directed all their attention to me. Locking the door as usual, went off to the baths. They spied on me through a crack, and seeing me at work on the banquet around me, they forgot their care for their losses, and dumbfounded by this ass's gourmet tastes, they fell about laughing. Then they summoned a couple of fellow servants, and then many more, to view the lazy ass's absurd gluttony. They were all in such fits of uncontained laughter that the sound reached their master's ears as he passed by. He asked what in heaven's name amused them so, and on hearing, he also took a look through the same crack. He too, richly amused, laughed so hard and long his stomach ached. Then he had them unlock the door so he could enter and watch me openly. Seeing Fortune's face smiling somewhat kindly on me at last, and filled with confidence by the delight of those around me, I felt quite at ease and went on eating unconcernedly. The master of the house, enjoying the novel sight, ordered me to be led, or rather conducted me himself to the dining room, where he had the table set and a whole variety of fresh dishes, as yet all untasted, placed before me. Though I was already well replete, I wanted to oblige him and win his favor, so I eagerly attacked the food laid before me, choosing everything an ass would surely loathe, and seeking to try my taste. They offered me meat seasoned with giant fennel, peppered chicken, and fish in exotic dressings, while the banquet hall resounded to their wild laughter. Then some jester among them said, "Try your friend with a little wine." The master took up his suggestion. That's not such a bad idea, you crazy fool. Our guest would surely like a cup of honeyed wine with his meal. So he turned to a slave, saying, Here, lad, rinse this gold goblet carefully, mix some mead, and offer it to my client here, and tell him I'll drink to him as well. The expectant audience were filled with anticipation, and I, not in the least dismayed, slowly and happily curled my lips like a ladle and swallowed the huge cupful in one swift gulp. A clamor rose as in unison they all wished me good health. Happy days and nights. The master was filled with delight, summoned the servants who'd bought me, then acquired me for 4 times the price. Next, he turned me over to his favorite freedman, a man of means, ordering him to take good care of me. The man indeed granted me much kindness and respect, and to commend himself further to his patron, went to vast trouble to devise new ways of amusing him with my clever tricks. He taught me to recline at dinner, leaning on one elbow, then taught me to wrestle and even dance with my forelegs in the air. Most wonderful of all, he taught me to respond to words with gestures. I'd show approval by nodding my head and negation by tossing it backwards. When I was thirsty, I'd look round at a servant and alternately wink my eyes to request a drink. It was trivial for me, of course, to perform all this without the need for a trainer. But I thought if I acted in too human a way without him, people would see me as an unlucky omen, condemn me as a monster, and serve me to the vultures for dinner. Soon word of me spread among the public, and my owner became famous, celebrated himself for my remarkable talents. Here's the man, they'd cry, who treats his ass as a friend and invites the beast to dinner, and it wrestles, dances, knows human language, and says what it wants with a nod. Now, before I go further, I must tell you, at least, as I should have done at the start, who my owner was and where it was he hailed from. Theasus was his name, a native of Corinth, the capital city of Achaia. In accordance with his ancestry and status, he'd risen through the ranks of public office and been nominated as one of the 2 chief magistrates. As a fitting response to the honor of receiving the rods and axe, he promised a 3-day spectacle, gladiatorial games to demonstrate his munificence to all. In pursuit then of public glory, he'd even traveled to Thessaly to purchase the fiercest wild beasts and the best gladiators there. Having bought everything to plan, he was already prepared for his journey home, scorning his fine carriages and his excellent wagons, which, opened and covered, followed his retinue, spurning his Thessalian horses and the Gallic steeds as well, whose noble lineage commanded an equally noble price. He instead had me decked out with gold medallions, crimson saddled, purple horsecloth, silver bridle, embroidered girth, and little tinkling bells, and it was me he rode. He talked to me often most fondly, in a kind and friendly way, proclaiming his pleasure at having me a companion and mount combined. As a, After a journey by land and sea, we arrived at last at Corinth, where hosts of citizens gathered less to honor Theasus, it seemed, than from a wish to see me. My reputation had spread so widely that even there I was a source of no little profit to the man who looked after me. Noting how eager some of them were to watch me perform, he locked the door and only allowed them in one at a time, making a pleasant profit each day by charging for the admission. Now among this crowd was a certain rich and powerful lady, who, having paid with the rest and enchanted by my tricks, was led by her constant sense of wonder to a great desire for me. She found no remedy for her kindling passion, but yearned ardently for the embrace of an ass, as Pasiphae yearned for that bull. So she struck a bargain with my keeper, paying a hefty price for a night with me. He agreed, not the least concerned whether I might object, but highly pleased by the profit. Okay, so for those of you who are unaware, this story of Pasiphae is a wild one. Let's look this up here. So you can get the full perspective here. Pasiphae was an immortal daughter of the sun god Helios. Like her siblings Aeetes and Circe, she was a skilled practitioner of witchcraft, pharmakeia. Pasiphae married King Minos of Crete and bore him a number of sons and daughters. As punishment for some offense against the gods committed either by herself or her husband, she was cursed with lust for the king's finest bull. The queen enlisted the help of the artisan Daedalus, who built her an animate wooden cow wrapped in bovine skin. Hidden inside the contraption, she coupled with the bull and conceived a hybrid child, the bull-headed Minotauros, Asterion. And there you get her with her beautiful child. Now she's the original furry. She had herself a fursuit built and went to town. Well, I guess she's worse. She's not really a furry. She's into bestiality and was probably cursed. So yeah. Sorry to the furries. It's just wild. Okay, let's go back here. All right, 1020. Finishing supper and leaving the dining room, we found the lady had been waiting for some time in my room. Heavens, what magnificent and luxurious preparations! 4 eunuchs hastened to make a bed on the floor, scattering a large heap of soft feather pillows for us, carefully overlaid with a cover of cloth of gold and Tyrian purple, with other smaller but no less numerous pillows on top, the kind that noble women use to support their heads and necks. Not wanting by their continued presence to delay their mistress's pleasure, they quickly closed the bedroom door and went their way, leaving the wax candles to cast their glistening rays and dispel for us the shadows of night. She took off all her clothes, and even the scarf of gauze with which she bound her beautiful breasts, and standing close to the light, she rubbed herself all over with oil of balsam from a pewter jug, and lavishly did the same to me with greater eagerness, moistening my nostrils with incense. Then she gave me a lingering kiss, not the sort of kisses hurled about in brothels, the cash-seeking kisses of whores, or the cash-denying ones from customers, but a pure one and sincere. And she spoke to me with tender affection. I love you. I want you. I desire you alone. I can't live without you. With all the other expressions women employ to inflame their lovers and declare their feelings. Then she tugged my halter and made me recline on the bed as I'd learned to do. I readily obliged, as the task at hand seemed not too new or difficult, and since I was about to enjoy the passionate embrace of a very lovely woman. Moreover, I'd sated myself with a copious amount of vintage wine, and the heady fragrance of the ointment had roused my desire. Still, I was troubled and not a little anxious at the problem of how, possessing such a quantity of great legs, I was to mount so fragile a woman, or clasp that soft and glowing body, all made of milk and honey, with my hard hooves, or kiss those sweet lips moist with ambrosial dew, with my vast misshapen mouth, with teeth like granite, and even though she was itching for it to the tips of her toes, how would she cope with my huge member? Alas for me, if I should injure the noble lady and be thrown to the wild beasts as part of my owner's entertainment. Meanwhile, she kept repeating her tender words, her assiduous kisses and sweet moans, with eyes that devoured me. At last she gasped, I have you now, my dove, my sparrow. As she spoke, she revealed how idle my worries had been, how irrelevant my thoughts, as she clasped me tightly and swallowed me whole. Indeed, every time I tried to spare her or pull back, she thrust herself closer, wildly clasped my back and clung on even harder, until by Hercules, I feared I might fail to sate her desires, and that Pasiphae, who bore the Minotaur, might have good reason to choose a bull for a lover. After a sleepless and relentless night, she left, avoiding the exposure of daylight, after agreeing the same price with my keeper for another session. My keeper was little loath to dispense these joys at her command, since he was not merely making a huge profit, but also rehearsing the thing for his master's benefit, to whom he freely disclosed the details of our whole performance. My master rewarded him richly, and decided I should form part of the entertainment, since, of course, that illustrious lover of mine was precluded because of her position, and no one else could be found to play the part even at a price. He procured a vile woman, already condemned to be thrown to the wild beasts in the arena. She would appear with me in front of the packed circus and be publicly shamed. This is what I learned of what led to her punishment. Oh, that's so disgusting. She had a husband whose father had ordered his wife, the young man's mother, who was now heavily pregnant with another child, to kill the infant at once, if it chanced to be female. During his husband's absence, she duly gave birth to a girl, but naturally possessed by maternal feelings, rebelled at the thought of obeying his command. She handed the child to a neighbor to nurture, and on her husband's return announced the birth and death of a girl. But when the lovely child was of marriageable age and the mother wished to give a dowry matching the girl's status, without her husband knowing, she revealed the secret to her son. She also feared, you see, that he, by chance, with the impulse of hot youth, might unwittingly seduce his sister, without either of them knowing of their relationship. But with an exemplary sense of duty, the young man religiously discharged his obligation to his mother, his duty to his sister, entrusting the secrets of his honorable house to the guardianship of silence. He took on the task his ties of blood demanded, while feigning on the surface to be acting from common humanity. For the girl denied a parent's affections, he provided a place in his own home, not of the kind neighbor, and soon married her off to one of his dearest and closest friends, giving a generous dowry from his own estate. But these fine and admirable arrangements, made with such self-restraint, could not escape Fortune's deadly notice, at whose instigation fierce jealousy set a course for the young man's house. And soon that wife of his, this woman, now condemned to the wild beasts for her crimes, began to fear the girl was a rival, a concubine to share his bed, then to curse her, and finally to seek her death by the cruelest of schemes. She devised the following snare: secretly removing her husband's signet ring, then setting off for the country, but sending a servant faithful to her, but no servant of good faith itself, to tell the girl that the husband had left for his country house, and wished to see her there, asking her to come alone and unaccompanied. And so that the girl would have no qualms, gave the servant the ring to show as a guarantee of it being a true message. The girl, on seeing the ring, and knowing it was her brother's, lost no time in setting out according to the request. All alone as instructed, once the girl was trapped in that web of cunning and deceit, caught fast in the snare, the wife, maddened to fury by the goads of passion, stripped her naked and flogged her cruelly. The girl screamed the truth over and over again, that she was no rival, that the husband was her brother, that there was no reason for this cruel anger. But the wife, treating it all as lies concocted by the girl, went on to murder her savagely, with a burning brand thrust between the thighs. Oh my God. Summoned by the news of her dreadful fate, her brother and her husband flew to the scene, mourned her with every show of lamentation, then buried her. The young man, unable to suffer his sister's death with calmness, a death so pitiful and inflicted so unfairly, shaken to the very core by grief, felt the furious workings of poisonous bile, and began to burn with such fiery fevers that he seemed in need of soothing drugs. His wife, one only in name, all loyalty lost, went to a dubious physician she knew, who had gained many a prize from his battles with disease and could count extensive trophies from the work of his right hand, and to buy her husband's death promised him 500 gold pieces down to sell her an instant poison. Once agreed, he made up a medicine which purported to be a well-known mixture for soothing the innards and eliminating bile that the eminent called the sacred potion, but was instead another sacred to Proserpine, that's Persephone, goddess of the underworld. Then, in the presence of the husband's close family and several friends and other relatives, the physician offered it, carefully mixed in a drink, to the patient with his own hand. The condemned woman and the rest. That shameless woman, however, seeking both to rid herself of her accomplice and avoid making the payment she promised, put her hand on the cup in full view of all, saying, "Noble physician, you shall not give my dear husband that medicine until you have swallowed a portion yourself. Who knows, it might contain some harmful poison. If, as a devoted wife, anxious for her husband's welfare, I show a proper sense of caution, I hope that does not offend so learned and careful a man as you." This savage woman's astounding and daring stroke shocked the physician and drove all stratagems from his mind, while the urgency of responding allowed no room for thought. And so, pining his hopes on an antidote he knew of, afraid to show any signs of a bad conscience by showing anxiety or hesitation, he took a large sip of the medicine. Reassured by the sight, the husband now took the cup and swallowed the proffered dose. The doctor, having discharged his task, now wished to flee so as to take the antidote in time, but the evil woman, with demonic persistence, would not let him move a step until, as she said, the medicine has first spread through the veins and its effects begin to show. After a long while and much persistence, he swayed her with his pleadings and protestations, and she granted him leave. Meanwhile, the poison had worked its way through his veins and been absorbed to his very marrow. Ravaged by the drug, already attacked by fits of torpor, he eventually reached home. He had barely finished telling his wife the story, wildly insisting she make sure of the payment promised, when, choking violently, the illustrious doctor expired. The young husband had fared no better, dying in a like manner, as his spouse wept false tears. Once he was buried, and the week of funeral rites had passed, the doctor's wife indeed sought compensation due. The murderess remained true to her character, and wearing the mask of a straight dealing, answered the doctor's wife pleasantly, and promised her generous payment, all in good time, if she would provide a little more of the potion. In brief, the doctor's wife, caught in the snare, agreed to this act of fresh wickedness, and to gain the lady's favor, ran home and returned with the whole jar. The woman, now with ample supplies for further crimes, stretched her murderous reach further. She had a baby daughter by the husband she had murdered, and was furious that the law gave the child right of inheritance. So in her desire for the entire estate, she became a threat to the daughter too, knowing the child's legacy would revert to her as the mother. Secretly tainted by crime though she was, she proved as evil a parent as a wife, and contriving a dinner party to suit, murdered the doctor's wife and the child in the same manner as before. But while in the doctor's case the fatal poison swiftly reached her vital organs and stopped the lungs, the doctor's wife, as the foul drug worked its way through her body like some venomous storm, destroying all in its path, suspected the truth. And when her breathing became labored, knew for certain, she ran to the governor's house, and appealing loudly for his protection, set the crowd in an uproar by claiming she could reveal appalling crimes. The governor brought her inside and invited her to speak, and she had given a careful description of all the atrocities that ruthless murderess had committed. From the start, when suddenly her mind was gripped by a bout of dizziness, her half-open lips closed convulsively, a long rasping noise came from her grinding teeth, and she fell lifeless at the governor's feet. He experienced in such matters, refusing to let pallid delay interfere with the swift sentencing of this venomous serpent, immediately arrested her servants and extracted the truth from them by torture. As for the murderess, because no other more fitting punishment sprang to mind, and though doubtless it was less than she deserved, he sentenced her to be thrown to the wild beasts. This was the woman whom I was meant to solemnly wed in public, and I waited for the day of the show in terrible suspense and great torment, wishing every now and then I might kill myself rather than be tainted by pollution from that depraved woman, and shamed by being made a spectacle. But without human hands and fingers, only misshapen hooves, I couldn't even draw a sword. In this hour of desperation, I consoled myself with one slight hope. Spring, at its inception, was even now scattering flowery gems and painting the meadows with brilliant light, and now the roses had burst from their thorny coverts and shone forth, exhaling their sweet, spicy scent, roses that could restore me to Lucius I once was. The day appointed for the show came at last. I was led to the amphitheater's outer wall by an enthusiastic crowd and procession. The entertainment began with actors, comic mimes, while I enjoyed myself by the gate, browsing the rich and juicy grass growing at the entrance, and now and then refreshing my eyes with a glance at the show through the open portal. There were boys and girls in the bloom of youth, outstanding in their fresh beauty, splendid costumes, and graceful movements, ready to perform the Pyrrhic dance. They moved in decorous, unwavering order, now weaving in and out in a whirling circle, now linking hands in a slanting chain, now in wedges, forming a hollow square, now separating into distinct troops. When the trumpet's final note unwove the knotted complexities of their intricate motion, the curtain was raised, the screens folded back, and the stage was set. There stood a mountain of wood, built with noble skill, to resemble that illustrious Mount Ida that Homer sang. It was planted out with living trees and bushes, and from its summit a stream of water flowed from a fountain made by the designer's own hand. A handful of goats were cropping the grass, and a youth, beautifully dressed in the manner of Paris as Phrygian shepherd, an Asiatic robe flowing over his shoulders, a gold tiara on his brow, pretending to be tending the flock. Then a shining lad, naked, except for a cloak worn on his left shoulder, attracting all gazes with his blonde hair, with little gold wings on either side, projecting from his curls in a wand, proclaiming him as Mercury. He danced forward, bearing in his right hand an apple covered in gold leaf, and offered it to the actor playing Paris. Then, relaying Jupiter's instructions for the action to follow, he nodded, swiftly and gracefully retraced his steps and vanished. Next arrived a respectable-looking girl dressed as the goddess Juno, a pure white diadem on her brow, and a scepter in her hand. Then on came another you'd have recognized as Minerva, a shining helm crowned with an olive wreath on her head, holding a shield and brandishing a spear, as if off to battle. Then another girl made her entrance, a real beauty with an ambrosial complexion, playing Venus, as Venus looked before marriage. Her exquisite naked form was bare except for a piece of silken gauze, with which she veiled her sweet charms. An inquisitive little breeze kept blowing this veil aside in wanton playfulness, so that it lifted now to show her ripening bud, or now pressed madly against her, clinging tightly, smoothly delineating her voluptuous limbs. The goddess's very coloring offered interest to the eye, her body the white of heaven from which she came, her veil the cerulean blue of the sea from which she rose. Each of the girls who played a goddess was accompanied by attendants, Juno by two lads from the acting troupe, depicting Castor and Pollux, heads capped with helmets shaped like halves of the egg they came from, topped by stars to signify the twins, their constellation. To the sound of an Ionian flute, piping melodies, the goddess advanced with calm, unpretentious steps, and with graceful gestures promised Paris rule over all Asia if he granted her the prize for beauty. The girl, whose weapons denoted Minerva, was guarded by two boys depicting terror and fear. armor bearers to the war goddess, leaping forward with drawn swords. Behind them, a piper played a battle tune in the Dorian mode, a deep droning, intermingled with shrill screeches, stirring them to energetic dance. Minerva tossed her head, glared threateningly, and informed Paris in swift and abrupt gestures that should he grant her victory in the beauty contest, then with her assistance he would be renowned for his bravery and his triumphs in war. Then came Venus to the audience's loud applause, taking her place gracefully at center stage, sweetly smiling and ringed by a host of happy little boys, so chubby and milky white you'd have thought them real cupids, flown down from heaven or in from the sea. With little wings and archery sets and all the rest, they truly fitted the part, lightening their mistress's way with glowing torches, as if they were off to a wedding feast. Next, a crowd of beautiful girls streamed in, the most graceful of graces, the loveliest horae, scattering garlands and loose flowers in tribute to their goddess, paying honor to the queen of all pleasure with the blossoms of spring. Right? The horae are the nymphs of the seasons, and the graces are the goddesses of virtue, the nymphs of virtue, right? Attendants of Aphrodite. Now, flutes of many notes played Lydian airs in sweet harmony, as if their soft melodies charmed the hearts of the audience. Venus began a gentle dance, with slow, hesitant steps and sinuously swaying body and head, advancing with delicate movements to the sweet sound of the flutes, letting fly passionate or sharp and menacing glances. She often seemed to be dancing by means of her eyelids alone. As soon as she reached the judge, Paris, she promised with transparent gestures that if he preferred her above the other two goddesses, she would grant him a bride of marvelous beauty, the very image of herself. At this, the Phrygian youth gladly handed her the golden apple in token of yielding her the victory. Escape once more. Why are you surprised then, O worthless ones, you legal cattle? Or to speak more accurately, you vultures in togas, if jurors sell verdicts for a high price these days, since in the childhood of the world a judgment made by a mortal regarding divine beauty itself succumbed to beauty's corrupting influence, and a rural shepherd chosen by mighty Jupiter to decide opted to win its delights for himself, to ruin of himself and his whole race. It was the same in another later case with Palamedes, a prince of the Achaeans, a man of great wisdom and learning, was condemned to death as a traitor by Agamemnon through false accusations, and again when Ulysses was preferred to Ajax, his superior in martial valor. As for the Athenians, those brilliant lawmakers, those masters of every art and science, what sort of trial did they grant Socrates, that man of divine wisdom, he whom the Delphic oracle declared greater in knowledge than all other mortals, was faced with the malice and deceit of a wholly worthless faction, accused of corrupting the young among whom, accused of corrupting the young, whom rather he kept in hand than murdered with a deadly cup of poisonous hemlock. Yet his legacy to follow, yet his legacy to his fellow citizens is a permanent reminder of their injustice, since to this day the greatest philosophers are of his noble persuasion, and in studying the highest happiness swear by his name. Lest you disapprove of my fit of indignation, and say to yourself, is every ass to turn philosopher now? I'll revisit the tale where I left off. Once the judgment of Paris had been delivered, Juno and Minerva, in sorrow and in anger, left the stage, miming their indignation at their defeat. But Venus declared her happiness by dancing joyfully in her delight, accompanied by her chorus of attendants. Then from a pipe, concealed on the very top of the mountain, wine mixed with saffron spurted into the air and rained down in a perfumed shower, sprinkling the goats grazing all around until, dyed to a richer beauty, their naturally white coats were stained deep yellow. The amphitheater having filled with lovely fragrance, a chasm yawned and swallowed the wooden mountain. Now, at the audience's clamor, a soldier ran from the theater to fetch the murderess from prison, condemned, as I said, to the wild beasts for her multiple crimes and doomed to a notorious union with me. To that end, a couch gleaming with Indian tortoiseshell to serve as our nuptial bed was being readied, with a high feather mattress and a flowery coverlet of silk. But I was not only deeply ashamed of performing the act in public and polluting myself by intercourse with that tainted woman, but tormented greatly by fear of death, since once we were linked together in Venus's embrace, whatever wild creature might appear to devour the murderess was scarcely likely to be so astoundingly clever, so well trained, so immoderately gentle as to maul her but spare me, the unconvicted innocent, fused to her thighs. I feared then not merely for my honor, but for my very life. Now, while my trainer was seeing to the assembly of our couch, and the slaves were busy preparing the hunting show or preoccupied with the delights of the scene, my thoughts were allowed free rein. None of them deemed a tamed ass of worthy close attention. So I ambled forward, carefully, without being noticed, till reaching the nearest gate, I raced away at top speed, galloping 6 full miles as fast as I could. I soon reached Sencrece. What is this? Let's look this up. The Kekcres, a village in Greece. Kekcres. Interesting. All right. The Kencree, which everyone knows is a famous slice of Corinthian territory on the Saronic Gulf. Everyone knows this. Washed by the waters of the Aegean. There the port is safe for shipping and always crowded with people. So I avoided the harbor and chose a secluded stretch of shore where, next to the breaking surf, I stretched out full length on a soft bed of sand to ease my weary body. And now the sun's chariot had rounded the final turning post of its daily course, surrendered myself to the quiet of evening to be conquered by sweet sleep. A few hours later, I woke in sudden terror and saw the moon's orb at the full, shining with dazzling brilliance, emerging from the sea. I knew that cloaked in the silent mysteries of nocturnal darkness, the supreme goddess exercises her greatest power. Her guidance governs human affairs, not only cattle and wild creatures, but even lifeless things being quickened by her power and her light's divine favor. All individual bodies on land, in sea or air, waxing with her as she waxes, and waning in obedience to her waning. Now fate seemed sated with the magnitude and frequency of my sufferings and offered me hope, though late, of deliverance. And I, determined on praying to the powerful image of the goddess before me, I swiftly shook off sluggish sleep and rose happy and eager. Wishing to purge myself, I ran at once to the sea to bathe, plunging my head 7 times under the waves, since divine Pythagoras declared that number especially fitting for religious rites. Then, my face wet with tears, I prayed to the great goddess. The great goddess, we're talking about Magna Mater, mother of all gods, Aphrodite Urania, queen of starry heaven, right? Many names. Here we go. Queen of heaven, whether you're known as bountiful Ceres, the primal harvest mother who delighted at finding your daughter Proserpine again, abolished our primitive woodland diet, showed us sweet nourishment, and now dwell at Eleusis, or heavenly Venus, who at the founding of the world joined the sexes by creating love, propagating the human race in endless generation, and worship now in the sea-girt sanctuary of Paphos, or Diana, Apollo's sister, you who relieve the pangs of countless childbirths with your soothing remedies, venerated now at Ephesus, or dread Proserpine herself, she of the night cries, who triple-faced combats the assaults of spirits, shutting them from earth above, who wanders the many sacred groves, propitiated by a host of rites. O light of woman, illuminating every city, nourishing the glad seed with your misty radiance, shedding that light whose power varies with the passage of the sun. In whatever aspect, by whatever name, with whatever ceremony we should invoke you, have mercy on me in the depths of my distress. Grant good fortune. Give me peace and rest after cruel tribulation. Let the toil, the dangers I've endured suffice. Rid me of this foul, four-footed form. Restore me to the sight of my own people. Make me the Lucius I once was. Or if I may not live, if I have offended some deity who hounds me with inexorable savagery, grant me the gift of death. When I had poured out my prayers, ending them in pitiful lamentation, my fainting spirit sank back, once more engulfed in sleep. I had scarcely closed my eyes when a divine apparition appeared, rising from the depths of the sea, her face worthy to be adored by the gods themselves. Slowly she rose till her whole body was in view, shaking herself free of the brine to stand before me, a radiant vision. If the poverty of human speech allows me, if the goddess herself grants me a wealth of verbal inspiration, I shall try to describe her marvelous beauty to you. Firstly, her long, thick hair in tapering ringlets was loosely spread over her divine neck and shoulders, and her head was crowned with a complex garland of interwoven flowers of every kind. At the center, over her brow, a flat disc like a mirror, or rather a moon symbol, shone brightly light. Coiled vipers reared from the right and left of her coronet, which was bristling with erect ears of corn. Her multicolored robe was of finest linen, gleaming here pure white, here a saffron yellow, there flaming rose red, with a woven border flowing with flowers and fruit. What dazzled me most of all was her jet black cloak, with its full sheen, wrapped, gleaming about her, slung from the left shoulder, knotted at the breast, and sweeping over her right hip. It hung in sweetly undulating complex folds down to a tasseled fringe. And along its borders and over its surface fell a scatter of glittering stars, round a full moon at the center, breathing fiery rays, and she bore a host of emblems. In her right hand she held the sistrum, a strip of bronze curved in a loop, with small rods across its width that made a tinkling noise as her forearm shook to a triple beat. From her left hand hung a boat-shaped vessel of gold, an asp with tumescent neck rearing to strike from the outer point of its handle. Her ambrosial feet wore slippers woven from palm leaves, emblems of victory. And in such guise, exuding all the sweet scents of Arabia, she deigned to address me with celestial voice. Wow, he gets to meet the goddess. Amazing. Behold, Lucius, here I am, moved by your prayer. I, mother of all nature and mistress of all the elements, firstborn of the ages and greatest of powers divine, queen of the dead and queen of the immortals, all gods and goddesses in a single form, who with the gesture commands heaven's glittering summit, the wholesome ocean breezes, the underworld's mournful silence, whose sole divinity is worshipped in differing forms, with varying rites, under many names by all the world. There at Pessinus, The Phrygians, firstborn of men, called me Cybele, mother of the gods, and Attica, a people sprung from their own soil, named me Caesaropian Minerva. In sea-girt Cyprus, I am Paphian Venus. Dictinian Diana to the Cretan archers, Stygian Proserpine to the three-tongued Sicilians, Adeleusis, ancient Ceres, Juno to some, to others Bellona, Hecate, Rhamnusia, while the races of both Ethiopias, first to be lit at dawn by the risen sun's divine rays, and the Egyptians too, deep in arcane lore, worship me with my own rites, and call me by my true name, Royal Isis. Wow, her true name, Royal Isis. I am here in pity for your misfortunes. I am here as friend and helper. Weep no more. End your lamentations. Banish sorrow. With my aid, your day of salvation is at hand. So listen carefully to my commands. From time immemorial, the day born of this night has been dedicated to my rites. On the coming day, the winter storms cease. The ocean's stormy waves grow calm. And my priests launch an untried vessel on the now navigable waters and dedicate it to me as the first offering of the trading season. You must await this ceremony with a mind neither anxious nor irreverent. The high priest at my command will carry you in procession. A garland of roses fastened to the system is in his hand. Don't hesitate to join the crowd. Trusting in my protection, push your way towards the priest. Then, as if you wish to kiss his hand, pluck gently at the roses with your mouth, and so at once throw off that wretched form of the most detestable of creatures, and have faith in my power to oversee the execution of my orders. For at this very moment, when I am here with you, I am with my priest too, telling him in a dream what he must do. When I wish, the heaving crowd will part before you, and amidst the joyous rites and wild festivity, no one will shrink from your unseemly shape, nor treat your sudden change of form as sinister and level charges at you out of spite. Remembering one thing clearly, though, and keep it locked deep within your heart, the life that is left to you to the final sigh of your last breath is pledged to me. It is right that all your days be devoted to she, whose grace returns you to the world of men. Under my wing, you will live in happiness and honor, and when your span of life is complete, you descend to the shades. Even there, in the sphere beneath the earth, you will see me, who am now before you, gleaming amidst the darkness of Acheron, queen of the Stygian depths, indwelling yourself in the Elysian fields. You will endlessly adore me, and I will favor you. Know, too, that if by sedulous obedience, dutiful service, and perfect chastity you are worthy of my divine grace, I, and I alone, can extend your life beyond the limits set by fate. So the holy revelation ended, and the invincible goddess withdrew into her own being. Instantly I was freed from sleep and leapt up, bathed in sweat, with feelings of fear and joy, filled with utter amazement at this clear manifestation of the great goddess's presence. I splashed myself with seawater, reviewing intently her series of potent commands. Soon the dark shades of night were dispelled. A golden sun arose, and at once a crowd of triumphant believers thronged the streets. Not only was I in my secret joy, but the whole world seemed filled with such happiness that the creatures, the skies, the very houses themselves seemed to radiate joy from their shining faces. For now, a serene and sunlit morning, on the heels of yesterday's frost, with its spring warmth, enticed the birds to sing in sweet harmony and charm with their happy greetings. The queen of the stars, the mother of the seasons, the mistress of the universe, even the trees, both the orchard trees that bear fruit and those simply content to give shade. gleaming with buds, roused by the southerly breeze, waved their branches gently, murmuring with a soft rustling sound. For the winter gales had ceased. The angry swell of the waves had subsided, and a calm sea now lapped the shore. The heavens, too, free of the cloudy night, shone clear and naked with splendor of their true light. Now the vanguard of the grand procession slowly appeared, its participants in the holiday attire each its participants in holiday attire, each in finery of their choosing. One wore a soldier's belt, another boots, spear, and a cloak proclaimed him a huntsman. Another was dressed as a woman in a silk dress with gilded sandals and curly wig, and walked in a mincing manner. Yet another looked like a gladiator in helmet and greaves, with shield and sword. There was a magistrate, it seemed, with the purple toga and rods of office. And there was a philosopher with a goatee beard, in a cloak with a staff and woven sandals. Here were a brace of long poles, one a fowler's with his bird line, the other a fisher's with line and hooks. Behold a tame bear dressed as a housewife, born in a sedan chair, and look, an ape in a Phrygian straw hat and saffron robe, dressed as the shepherd lad Ganymede. Ganymede is the cupbearer of Zeus, lover of Zeus, who gives the ambrosia, and waving a golden cup. And lastly, an ass, wings glued to its shoulders, with a decrepit old man on its back, a Bellerophon and his Pegasus, enough to split your sides. Bellerophon is the one who rides Pegasus, the magical flying horse. We can look this guy up since he's a little more obscure. We go one to this here. Bellerophon. Bellerophon was one of the most celebrated heroes of myth. He was a son of the god Poseidon and Eurynomé, wife of King Glaucus of Corinth. In his youth, Bellerophontes captured the winged horse Pegasus as it came to drink from the town's fountain. He was later exiled for the murder of a family member and journeyed to the court of King Proteus in Argos for purification. The queen, however, developed a lust for the hero, and when he spurned her, she told her husband he had tried to violate her. Proteus then sent him off to King Iobates in Lycia, with a closed letter requesting the youth be put to death. Iobates was reluctant to do this himself, and so commanded Bellerophontes to slay the fire-breathing chimera, which was ravaging the land. He rode into battle against the beast on the back of the Pegasus and slew it by driving a lead-tipped spear into its fiery gullet. Wow. There's more to that story, but I think you get the gist. Bellerophon, who killed the chimera and rode Pegasus. Beautiful. Okay. But behind these laughter-loving crowd pleasers wandering all over the place, the procession proper was readying itself to celebrate the goddess who saves. Goddess who saves, the Soteria. At its head went women in gleaming white, garlanded with flowers of spring, rejoicing in their varied burdens, scattering blossoms along the path where the sacred gathering would pass. Others had shining mirrors fastened to their backs to show their obedience to the goddess who would follow. Or they bore ivory combs and feigned to shape and dress the goddess's royal hair, while others sprinkled the streets with pleasant balsam and fragrances. There followed a throng of men and women, carrying every means of shedding light, such as torches, lamps, and wax candles, to honor the source of the celestial stars. Now musicians with pipes and flutes appeared, playing melodies pursued by a fine choir of chosen youths, gleaming in their snow-white holiday robes, and singing a delightful hymn composed by a talented poet, aided by the muses, whose words acted as a prelude to the greater vows to come. Here were the temple pipers of the great god Serapis too, playing their traditional anthem on slanting flutes, extending close to the right ear. So Serapis is related to Attis and also to Dionysus. Let's take a good quick look here for those who are less familiar. And I believe they're Egyptian, Greco-Egyptian. Right, let's see here. Okay, what does Wiki say? Serapis is a Greco-Egyptian god, a Socratic deity derived from the worship of the Egyptian Osiris and Apis, the Apis bull, right? Serapis was extensively popularized in the 3rd century BC on the orders of Greek pharaoh Ptolemy Soter, Soteria, as a means to unify the Greek and Egyptian subjects of the Ptolemaic kingdom. The cult of Serapis was spread as a matter of deliberate policy by subsequent Ptolemaic kings. Serapis continued to increase in popularity during the Roman Empire, often replacing Osiris as the consort of Isis in temples outside of Egypt. Alongside his Egyptian roots, he gained attributes from other deities, such as chthonic powers linked to the Greek Hades and Demeter, and benevolence derived from his associations with Dionysus. So there we go. Interesting. Okay. 11:10. And then the heralds passed, warning the people openly to clear a path for the holy procession. A mighty throng of men and women of every age and rank, initiates of the sacred mysteries, poured on behind, their linen robes shining radiantly, the women's hair in glossy coils under transparent veils, the men's heads closely shaved and glistening, the earthly stars of the great rite, and each one shook a sistrum of bronze or silver or sometimes gold, giving out a shrilling, tinkling sound. The foremost priests of the cult came next, in white linen, drawn tight across their chests and hanging to their feet, carrying the distinctive emblems of powerful gods. The first held a glittering lamp, not like the lamps we use to light our nocturnal feasts, but shaped like a golden boat, with a tall flame flaring from its central vent. The second priest carried an altar top, that is, a source of help, its name, Auxilia, derived from the auxiliary aid the great goddess brings. Then the third approached, holding on high a branch of palm, its leaves of fine gold, and a caduceus like Mercury. Mercury, of course, is Hermes, god of communication and messenger and magic. A fourth showed a cast of a left hand with fingers extended, a symbol of justice, since the left hand's natural clumsiness, lack of quickness and dexterity is more appropriate to justice than the right. And he carried a little golden vessel shaped like a woman's breast, from which he poured milk as a libation. The fifth held a winnowing fan woven from twigs of gold, not willow. That's interesting because the winnowing fan we know from the Odyssey, Odysseus has to bring that into the center of the land and put it where X marks the spot. Interesting. And a sixth priest bore an amphora. What's an amphora? I'm not sure offhand. All right, shake Google. What's an amphora? Okay. An amphora is a type of container with a pointed bottom, characteristic shape and size, which fit tightly and therefore safely against each other in storage rooms and packages, tied together with a rope and delivered by land or sea. I see. Interesting. So it's some jug, probably of wine. Behind them came the gods, denying to walk on human feet. Firstly, Anubis, right? That's the Egyptian god of the dead. You can go to Wiki and check out Anubis. So, what is Wiki? Anubis, also known as Impu or Ampu, is the god of funerary rites, protector of graves, and guide to the underworld, usually depicted as a Canaan or man with a canine head. Interesting. Okay, we'll go back to topos. Oops. What am I doing here? Okay. That dread messenger between the powers above and the powers beneath the earth, with a face one side black, the other gold, his jackal's neck erect, bearing a caduceus in his left hand, and a green palm branch in his right, in his footsteps a priest, with proud and measured step, carried a statue on his shoulders, a cow, seated upright, the cow being a fruitful symbol of the divine mother of all. Another bore a basket containing secret implements, concealed objects of great sanctity, while a third fortunate priest carried an ancient image of the great goddess, in the lap of his robe, not in the shape of any beast, wild or tame, or bird or human being, but inspiring everyone in its skilled working by its very strangeness, being the ineffable symbol somehow of a deeper sacredness, to be cloaked in awful silence, formed as it was of gleaming gold, after this manner. It took the form of a little hollow urn, its surface engraved with Egyptian hieroglyphs, with a wounded base. An extended spout appeared slightly like a beak, and a broad curving handle at the opposite side extending backwards deeply, which an asp, coiled in a knot, reared its scaly, swollen neck on high. Oh wow, their image of the goddess is a cup with a beak and a snake for a handle, an asp. And now the blessing the ever kindly goddess had promised me drew near, and the priest appeared, the keeper of my fate, my true salvation. He carried in his right hand, adorned as she had commanded, a sistrum for the goddess, with a garland of roses for me, a fitting garland of victory indeed, since after enduring such toils and escaping such perils, I would now conquer that fortune who had savaged me so cruelly. But though filled with sudden joy, I refrained from galloping forward in unrestrained delight, since I rightly feared that the peaceful onward movement of the procession might be halted at the fierce onrush of a quadruped. So, with unhurried near human steps, I slowly and gently wriggled through the crowd, which made way, doubtless due to divine intervention, and thus moved softly within. Now the priest, who I could see, remembered the orders he had received in dream, though he still marveled at the actual event that fulfilled the prophecy, halted at once, and of himself stretched out his hand and held the rose garland level with my lips. My heart leapt with a rapid beat, and I trembled as I tore with eager mouth at the glistening wreath woven of lovely roses, which, greedy for the outcome promised, I greedily devoured. Nor did the goddess' divine promise fail, for on the instant my ugly bestial form slipped from me. First the coarse hair fell from my body, then my dense hide grew thin, my sagging paunch grew trim, the soles of my feet sprouted toes, though through their hooves my hands were no longer feet, but reached out in a proper manner. My long neck shrank, my head and face rounded, my huge ears shrank back to their former size, my craggy teeth reduced to a human scale. And what had tormented me most of all, my tail existed no more. The onlookers marveled, and the priests paid reverence to the evident power of the mighty goddess, to her magnificence, which confirmed my nocturnal vision, and to the ease of my transformation, they stretched their arms towards heaven, and clearly, with one voice, bore witness to her wondrous beneficence. Wow. As for me, I stood speechless, utterly dumbfounded, rooted to the spot, unable to grasp with my mind so sudden and great a joy, lost for what I might begin to say, or to find utterance for this rediscovered voice. What auspicious speech might serve to inaugurate use of my refound tongue? What fine words could express my gratitude to so powerful a goddess? But the high priest, through some divine revelation, had learnt all of my miseries, and though he himself was moved by the strangeness of the miracle, swiftly signaled for me to be given a piece of linen cloth to cover myself. For once the ass's wretched hide had vanished from me, I had clenched my thighs together and covered myself with my hands, to grant as much decent natural protection as a naked man can find. Now one of the faithful swiftly doffed his outer tunic and covered me hastily, while the high priest, still startled, gazed at me with a kindly and exalted expression, saying, Lucius, after suffering many labors, buffeted by fortune's mighty tempests, by the fierce winds of fate, you reach at last the harbor of peace, the altar of mercy. Neither your birth and rank nor your fine education brought you any aid, as on youth's rash and slippery paths you plunged into servile pleasures and reaped the perverse rewards of ill-starred curiosity. Yet blind fortune, while tormenting you with imminent danger, has brought you from the throes of evil chance to blessed happiness. Let her vent her rage and fury now on some other object of her cruelty. For hostile fate finds no opening against those whose lives our royal goddess renders free to serve her. How could those bandits, wild beasts, servitude, the windings of savage journey that ended where they began, the fear of death renewed each day, how could all they serve fortune's evil turn? For now you are under the wing of an all-seeing providence, who, with the splendor of her light, illumes all the gods. Wear a happier face to match the white robe you wear now, and join the procession of the saving goddess with a joyful and conquering step. Let the unbelieving bear witness and understand their errant ways. Behold, Lucius, freed from his former troubles, delighting in the favor of mighty Isis, triumphing over fate, and to be more secure and list in the protection of this holy cauter, to whose oath of obedience you were but now summoned. Dedicate yourself to the commands of our sect. Accept the burden of your own free will, for once you begin to serve the goddess, you will know the fruits of freedom more completely. Drawing a deep breath after this inspired utterance, the high priest fell silent, while I joined the sacred procession and marched along behind the holy emblems, famous now to all and conspicuous, the subject of their nods and pointing fingers. The whole crowd spoke of me. There's the man who was turned back into a human being by the august powers of the omnipotent goddess. How happy he is, by Hercules, thrice blessed, who no doubt through the purity and loyalty of his past life has earned such astounding favor from heaven that he was, as it were, reborn and accepted at once into her holy service. Meanwhile, amidst the tumult of the festive celebrations, we had slowly progressed towards the seashore and arrived at the very place where, as an ass, I had been stabled the previous day. There, once the emblems of the gods had been properly disposed, the high priest consecrated a finely crafted ship, decorated with marvelous Egyptian hieroglyphics. Taking a lighted torch, an egg, and some sulfur, he uttered solemn prayers with reverent lips, and purified the ship thoroughly, dedicating it and naming it for the goddess. Shining sail of this happy vessel bore an inscription, its letters woven in gold, the text of the prayer for prosperous sailing throughout the new season. The mast of smooth pine was raised now, tall and splendid, the flag at its tip, conspicuous from afar. Gold leaf glittered from the stern, which was shaped like Isis's sacred goose, while the whole hull of highly polished citron wood gleamed pale. Then the crowd of priests and laity alike vied in loading the vessel with winnowing fans, spread with spices and the like, and poured libations of milk and grain over the waves. Once the ship had received a wealth of gifts and auspicious prayers, the moon ring ropes were loosed, and she was given to the waters, accompanied by a gentle breeze that rose in greeting. And when she was so far out to sea we could no longer see her clearly, the priests took up their burdens again and set out joyfully for the shrine, in the same fine and orderly procession as before. Arriving at the temple, the high priest and the bearers of the holy emblems and those initiates, privy already to the sacred inner sanctuary of the goddess, were admitted into that hidden chamber, where the lifelike statues were arranged in proper order. Then one of the throng, whom they all called the secretary, standing by the door, summoned the shrine bearers, the pastophori, as the sacred college were named, as if calling them to an assembly. Then from a high dais he read aloud from a book Latin prayers for the mighty emperor's health, for the knights, the senate, and the Roman people, the ships and the mariners, under the sway of our worldwide empire. Then in Greek, according to the Greek ritual, he uttered the formula ploephesia, meaning that ships could now be launched. That his words were well received by all was confirmed by the ensuing acclamation of the crowd. Then, filled with joy, the people bearing green twigs, sacred branches, and garlands they had gathered, kissed the feet of the goddess, whose statue made of silver stood on the temple steps, before scattering to their own homes. As for me, my thoughts would not allow me to stray a finger's breadth from that place. But meditating on my past misfortunes, I gazed intently on that image of the goddess. Meanwhile, winged rumor had not tarried in her swift flight, but spread the news of the beneficent goddess's notable kindness to me, and my own good fortune everywhere, even throughout my own city. At once my servants, friends, blood relatives ceased mourning for my supposed death, and delighted at the unexpected tidings, and bringing various gifts, hastened to see one risen from the darkness to the light. I too was cheered at meeting with those again whom I'd relinquished hope of ever seeing, receiving their kind offerings gratefully, since they'd brought enough in their generosity to relieve me of any want. I spoke with each of them in turn as I should, narrating my former troubles and present joy, then swiftly returned to that meditation on the goddess, which was my chief delight. I took a room in the temple precincts and set up house there, and though serving the goddess as layman only as yet, I was a constant companion of the priests and a loyal devotee of the great deity. No moment of rest, not a night passed without some admonishing visitation from her. She urged me again and again to become an initiate to her rites, for which I had long been destined. But though willing and eager to obey, I was held back by religious awe, since I knew from careful study that the rites of her order were harsh, those regarding abstinence and chastity demanding, and how one must always, with care and circumspection, guard against the countless vicissitudes of life. Despite my sense of urgency, and though I thought again and again of these matters, somehow I still delayed. One night I dreamed the high priest appeared to me, his arms full of gifts. When I asked the meaning of these offerings, he replied that they were things of mine from Thessaly, that my servant Candidus was here too. On waking, I reflected on my vision for hours, wondering what it portended, having no servant of that name. Yet whatever the dream might presage, I felt certain for the gifts I would know profit, and so was happily expectant of some fortunate event as I waited for the doors of the shrine to open. The bright white sanctuary curtains were drawn, and we prayed to the august face of the goddess, as a priest made his ritual rounds of the temple altars, praying and sprinkling water and libation from a chalice filled from a spring within the walls. When the service was finally complete, at the first hour of the day, just as the worshippers with loud cries were greeting the dawn light, the servants I had left behind in Hypata, after Photis condemned me to my sad wanderings, suddenly appeared. Hearing the news, they had even brought my horse, sold to various buyers but identifiable by the markings on his back, and regained. And then it was that I marveled at my prophetic dream, whose promise of good had not only been confirmed, but also the retrieval of my white horse, foretold in the dream servant's name of Candidus. I believe Candidus is one of the horses of Achilles. Let me look this up. What is Candidus? Candidus. What are you? Oh, it just means white. Candidus is a neutral term for white. Okay. Interesting. From then on, I became ever more solicitous in my constant attendance on the deity, believing that my present blessings were a guarantee of future good. Moreover, day by day, my desire for holy orders intensified, and time and again, I entreated the high priest to hasten my initiation into the mysteries of the sacred night. But he, being a grave man remarkable for his close observance of the strictest religious discipline, restrained my insistence gently and kindly, as parents will restrain their children's unripe urges, calming my natural eagerness with a comforting expectation of good to come. He told me the proper day for a person's initiation is always marked by a sign from the goddess, that the officiating priest was likewise indicated by her, and even the costs of the ceremony to be defrayed. He advised me to suffer the delay with reverence and patience, since over-eagerness and disobedience were faults to be guarded against assiduously, and neither to hang back when called nor advanced myself when not. None of his order had been so wrong-minded, so determined on their own destruction, as to dare to take office rashly or sacrilegiously and without the goddess's direct command, and thereby to commit a deadly sin. The gates of the underworld and the guardianship of life are both in her hands, he said, and the rites of initiation are akin to a willing death and salvation through her grace. Indeed, those whose term of life was drawing to a close, who already stood on the threshold of light, if the sex unbroken mysteries could be safely entrusted to them, were often summoned by the power of the goddess to be in a manner reborn through her grace and set again on a path of renewed life. I too, he suggested, should bow likewise to heaven's decrees, even though I had been destined for and called long since to be the blessed service of the goddess by clear and evident signs of that great deity's favor. And I should, as the priest did, abstain from unholy and forbidden foods, so as to enter more deeply into the secret mysteries of the purest of faiths. Thus spoke the high priest, and patient in my obedience, I performed my task each day at celebrations of the holy rites, zealously, diligently, in calm tranquility and laudable silence. Nor did the great goddess's saving goodness fail me, nor did she torment me with long delay. One dark night, in commands as clear as day, she proclaimed that the hoped-for time had arrived, when she would grant me my dearest wish. She told me that the resources must be found for the ceremony, and decreed that her high priest Mithras, who she explained was linked to me celestially by a certain conjunction of the planets, would himself perform the rite. Oh, wow, Mithras, the Persian god, right, who slays the bull. Another mystery cult. Interesting. These and other kind decrees of the great goddess raised my spirits. And before the light of the day shone, I shook off sleep, and hastening to the high priest's rooms, I met and greeted him at the entrance. I was set on demanding my initiation more vigorously than ever, believing it was now my due. But the instant he saw me, he preempted my plea, saying, "Ah, Lucius, how blessed, how fortunate you are that the august deity so strongly favors you in her benevolence. Why do you linger here in idleness when the day has come which you've long prayed for endlessly? When at the divine command of the many-titled goddess, these very hands of mine will introduce you to the most sacred mysteries of her religion." Then that most generous of men took my arm and led me to the doors of the vast temple, and when he had opened them, according to the ritual prescribed, and then performed the morning sacrifice. He brought from the inner sanctuary various books, written in characters strange to me, shaped like creatures, represented compressed expressions of profound concepts. In in others, the tops and tails of letters were knotted, coiled, interwoven like vine tendrils to hide their meaning from profane and ignorant eyes. From these books, he read aloud for me the details of what was needed for my initiation. At once, I set about acquiring those things myself, or procuring them zealously through friends, while sparing no expense. Then the high priest, escorted by a band of devotees, led me to the nearest baths, saying the occasion required it. When I had bathed according to custom, he asked favor of the gods, and purified me by a ritual cleansing, sprinkling me with water. Then in the early afternoon, he led me to the shrine again, and placed me at the goddess's feet. He gave me certain orders too, sacred for open utterance then, with all the company as witnesses, commanded me to curb my desire for food for 10 days following, to eat of no creature and drink no wine. I duly observed all this with reverence and restraint. And now came the evening, destined for my appearance before the goddess. The sun was setting, bringing twilight on, when suddenly a crowd followed towards me to honor me with sundry gifts in accordance with the ancient and sacred rite. All the uninitiated were ordered to depart. I was dressed in a new-made robe of linen, and the high priest, taking me by the arm, led me into the sanctuary's innermost recess. And now, diligent reader, you are no doubt keen to know what was said next and what was done. I'd tell you, if to tell you were allowed. If you were allowed to hear, then you might know, but ears and tongue would sin equally, the latter for its profane indiscretion, the former for their unbridled curiosity. Oh, I shall speak, since your desire to hear may be a matter of a deeper religious longing, and I would not torment you with further anguish, but I shall speak only of what can be revealed to the minds of the uninitiated without need for subsequent atonement, things which, though you have heard of them, you may well not understand. So listen and believe in what is true. I reached the very gates of death, and treading Proserpine's threshold, yet passed through all the elements and returned. I have seen the sun at midnight shining brightly. I have entered the presence of the gods below and the presence of the gods above, and I have paid due reverence before them. Beautiful. The initiate of Isis. When dawn came and the ceremony was complete, I emerged wearing 12 robes as a sign of consecration. Sacred dress indeed, though nothing stops me from speaking of it. Since a host of people were there and saw me, as instructed, I stood on a wooden dais placed at the center of the holy shrine before the statue of the goddess, conspicuous in my fine, elaborately embroidered linen. The precious outer cloak hung from my shoulder to ankle, so that I was wrapped around with creatures worked in various colors. Here, Indian serpents, there, Hyperborean griffins, winged lions of that distant region of the world. The priests called this garment the Olympian stole. I held a burning torch in my right hand, and my head was gracefully garlanded with a wreath of gleaming palm leaves projecting outwards like rays of light, adorned thus in the likeness of the sun, and standing there like a statue. The curtains suddenly opened. I was exposed to the gaze of the crowd who strayed around me. That day my initiation into the mysteries was marked as a festive occasion by a splendid feast among a convivial gathering. On the next day, the third, a similar ritual ceremony was performed, with a sacred breakfast bringing an official end to the proceedings. I stayed at the temple a few days longer, enjoying the ineffable pleasure of gazing on the goddess's sacred image, bound to her by an act of beneficence I could never repay. But finally, as instructed by her, for it was only with immense difficulty that I could sever the ties born of my fervent longing for her, I paid my debts of gratitude at last, in accordance with my small means, if not in full, and began to prepare for my journey home. I ended my stay by prostrating myself before her, washing the goddess's feet, with my welling tears, as I prayed to her, gulping my words, my voice broken by repeated sobbing. O holy and eternal, Savior of mankind, ever bountiful in cherishing mortal beings, bringing a mother's sweet affectations to the miseries of the wretched, no day, no night, not even an instant passes empty of your beneficence. You who protect man on land and sea, who extend your saving hand and dispel life's tempests, quelling fortune's storms, untwisting the inextricable windings of fate, restricting the planet's harmful aspects. The powers above adore you, the powers below pay you reverence. Yet you set the globe spinning, fuel the sun, command the universe, and press Tartarus beneath our feet. You the stars obey. For you the seasons turn, in you the deities rejoice, in you it is that all the elements serve. At your order breezes sigh, clouds yield nourishment, seeds quicken and seedlings grow, the birds flying in the sky, the wild beasts that prowl the mountains, the serpents that lurk underground, the very monsters of the deep tremble at your power. By my eloquence, but my eloquence is unfit to sing your praises, my wealth of words too meager to render proper sacrifice, my voice too weak to express my reverence for your majesty. Nor would 1,000 tongues and as many mouths and an eternal flow of inexhaustible speech suffice. I must therefore try to do the sole thing the poor but devout can do, and keep the memory of your divine face always in my thoughts, and the vision of your sacred presence forever in my heart. Ending this prayer to the power on high, I embraced Mithras, my priest, and now my spiritual father, clasping his neck and kissing him again and again, and begged him to forgive my inability to repay his great kindnesses to me as his deserved. Then, after lingering a long while in renewed expression of thanks, I at last set out to revisit my ancestral home, after so long away, yet hastily, for after a few days' stay, I swiftly gathered my things, and at the great goddess's command, took ship for Rome. Blown by favoring winds, I soon arrived safely at Portus Augustus, near Ostia, and taking a fast carriage, reached the holy city in the evening of December 13th, the Ides of December. My most pressing business was to visit the temple of royal Isis, the great goddess in the Campus Martius, where she was worshipped with utmost reverence under the name of Isis Compensis, and pray to her there daily. A newcomer to that shrine, but an initiate of her sect, I was a constant presence there. When the mighty sun had circled the zodiac and a year had gone, the ever-vigilant goddess, who kindly watched over me, once more troubled my sleep and spoke again of rites and initiation. Since I had long been hers, I wondered what new task she was prompting, what new future she foretold. Yet, while I was debating in my own mind and searching my conscience with the help of the priests, I suddenly realized that I had not yet been introduced to the mysteries of invincible Osiris, the great god who is the mighty father of the gods. Though his rites of initiation were still quite distinct, his godhead and worship were linked, even joined to that of Isis. I should thus have realized that I was being sought after as a servant of his great divinity as well. The issue was not long in doubt, for the following night I had a vision in which an initiate, dressed in white linen, brought ivy wreaths and thyrsi, with things that must be nameless, and placed these various objects on my household altar then, seated in my chair, ordered me to arrange a sacred feast, in order evidently to help me know him again by a sure sign of identity. His left ankle was slightly twisted, and he walked with a hesitant limp. My cloud of doubt was lifted by this clear manifestation of the god's own wishes, and after the morning prayers for the goddess were complete, I at once began to ask about me with utmost zeal as to whether any there exactly resembled him of my dream. Confirmation came immediately when I caught sight of one of the pastophori, who not only limped like the man in my vision, but also was alike in his dress and appearance. I later learned he was called Asinius Marcellus, a name not appropriate to my own transformation. Without pausing for an instant, I approached him, and indeed he was not surprised by our ensuing conversation, since he himself had been ordered in a similar manner to preside over my initiation. In his dream the previous night, he had been arranging garlands for Osiris when he heard from the great god's own oracular mouth, which speaks each man's fate, that a man of Madaros was being sent to him, that the man was poor, but the priest must perform his rites of initiation, since by the god's aid the man would win fame by his studies, and the priest himself a fine recompense. Though pledged to initiation, the meagerness of my funds delayed the ceremony, much to my disappointment. The cost of my voyage had consumed my modest legacy, and Rome proved much more expensive than the provinces. Hindered by dire poverty, I felt tormented like a sacrificial victim caught, as the proverbs say, between the altar stone and the knife. Yet the god's insistence weighed on me, and after suffering his troublesome and frequent promptings, which ended in a peremptory command, I sold the shirt from my back and scraped together the sum required. Surely, the god said, when issuing his final order, you'd not hesitate to pawn your own rags to fund your idle pleasures. So why now, on the brink of a vital act, do you brood on a state of poverty, which will bring not a single regret? I made my preparations and again went without meat for a 10-day period and shaved my head, after which I was initiated into the nocturnal mysteries of the supreme God and confidently enacted the holy rites of his worship too. Thus I was consoled for my enforced stay in Rome, and since I practiced law, pleading in Latin not Greek, my small funds were favorably increased by the warming breath of success. Not long afterwards, I was again presented in a dream with the sudden and startling demand from the deities for yet a third initiation. Greatly surprised and puzzled, I pondered their orders in my mind. What did the gods mean by this new and strange design? What was it that, despite my 2 previous initiations, still remained to be accomplished? Perhaps the priests had erred or omitted something in those ceremonies. I even began to hold misgivings as to their good faith. But while tossed on this stormy sea of speculation, anxious in the extreme, a kindly apparition in a midnight visitation instructed me as follows. Fear nothing from this long train of ceremonies, for nothing previously was done in error. Rather be happy. Rejoice that the deities think you worthy, and exult that you will experience thrice what others scarcely dream of undergoing once, and so consider yourself eternally blessed. Moreover, in your case, a third performance of the rites is essential, since the garments of the goddess you wore in the province are stored in her temple, and you lack them here in Rome to perform your worship on holy days, or don those sacred robes when commanded. Therefore, to enjoy health, happiness, and good fortune, delight in divine instruction, and be initiated once more. Once the pervasive force of this divine dream had registered with me, I neither ignored the matter nor procrastinated, but swiftly told the priest of my vision. Then I once more submitted to the abstention from meat required, adding of my own will to the 10 days prescribed by enduring tradition, and met the cost of all the preparations and equipment required with no regard for my actual resources, rather without stint from pure religious zeal. Yet I felt not a moment's regret for all the effort and expense, since having favored me through its beneficent grace with a steady income and from my practice of law. Finally, a few days later, Osiris, greatest of the gods, highest among the greatest, mightiest among the mighty, Lord of the mightiest, appeared to me in dream, and not in some semblance other than his own, but greeting me face to face, in sacred utterance, urging me to win fame as now in the courts through my advocacy, without fear of the slanders provoked by my assiduous study of the laws of Rome. Further, I was not to serve him as a minor member of the flock, but as one of his colleagues, one of his college of pastophori, the shrine bearers, and a member of the quinquennial council. What a weird word. Quinquennial. Once again, then, I shaved my head completely, not hiding my baldness covertly, but displaying it proudly wherever I passed. I performed with joy the duties of that venerable priesthood founded in the days of Sulla. Wow. Wild. Wild. What an incredible story. What an incredible story. Thank you guys all for listening in and being with me through that as we watched our man Lucius finally go through all of his initiations and become a member of the priesthood, one of the pastophori. Beautiful. What a fun story. I am now thoroughly exhausted. My voice is completely parched. I wanted to finish it and I got it done. I hope you guys all loved it. I certainly did. So, thank you for watching. Peace and love. And come back tomorrow when we begin Ovid's Metamorphoses. All right. Take care. Thank you.